Welcome to the IND podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Like, comment, subscribe. Join our growing international community. A growing humanitarian and migration crisis, increasing ground battles, an air offensive, and the naval cutoff of Ukraine. These are just some of the developments that are occurring in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Now, we're going to get back to this war. As I've stated before, it is the most important historical event that has occurred in contemporary history today, maybe besides 9/11. Now, let's get into pretty much what is happening. Today, a second round of peace talks are to occur between an envoy of the government of Ukraine and the government of Russia, with the main goal of agreeing to peace. Now, the reality is these peace talks are probably not going to produce anything productive, just like the last ones. Now, just like the previous peace talks that were held, they are being hosted in Belarus, which is the neighboring country north of Ukraine. Notably, Belarus is one of Russia's few remaining international allies, led by dictator Alexander Lukashenko. Now, let's just go into the demands being made by each party. What Vladimir Putin wants from Ukraine in order for him to pull his soldiers back is for Ukraine to, one, fully demilitarize. And that is a very vague statement. But what can be assumed by the meaning of that is that Vladimir Putin intends for Ukraine to lose its full defense capabilities or voluntarily give them up. Vladimir Putin's second demand is that Ukraine formally reject and renounce any bid or intention to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And finally, for Ukraine to announce and add to its constitution that it is a neutral nation, that it will join no international organization and it will take no sides in any international conflicts. Now, Ukraine's demands are very, very simple. Ukraine has stated that their two major goals during these peace talks are, one, to ensure the creation of various civilian corridors or safe passages for civilians to get out of Ukrainian cities. Now, the reason for this is because Russian aerial attacks have increased, artillery bombardments have increased, and Russian targeting, even though the Russian government has denied it, has seemed to increasingly target residential areas and other civilian targets. Now, while Russia and the government and the military have denied these claims that its missiles or attacks are targeting any residential or civilian targets, videos and other evidence have been confirmed by independent third parties on the ground that this is occurring. And it should be noted that 227 civilian deaths have been confirmed, with 526 civilian wounded in this conflict. Now, those real numbers are actually probably much, much higher. And it needs to be stated that over 1 million people have left Ukraine already and migrated to other countries, primarily Poland, with 500,000 people being in Poland right now, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, the neighboring countries of Ukraine. Now, it needs to be stated that 1 million people, Ukraine is a country with a population of 45 million. 1 million people is over 2% of the population of Ukraine. And this war has only been occurring for a week. This is a massive international migration crisis and a domestic demographic one. Now, getting back to the negotiation demands of Ukraine. Number one is safe civilian passage for people that want to leave the country and seek refuge. And number two is an immediate ceasefire. The stance of Ukraine and President Volodymyr Zelensky throughout the first peace talks that were held in Belarus and these second ones is that no concrete agreement can be made while one side is shelling or attacking the other. In order for a productive or fair agreement to be constructed from these talks, both sides need to not be attacking one another. A state of war needs to pause for a political solution to be found, which is a bit of a catch-22, but it makes sense. When Ukraine is being attacked or bombarded, it is really difficult for it to make any reasonable, logical, or normal concessions, and it is unfair to that party. Now, the reality is no agreements are going to be made from this peace talk. Russia's agreements are completely disagreeable to Ukraine, and Ukraine's agreements, even though they are reasonable, are not going to be agreeable with Vladimir Putin, who has, in a private statement to French President Emmanuel Macron, stated that he is willing to take this war to the end. Now, that is vague. However, what it most likely means is Putin is willing to keep pushing, keep sending his forces until what many are assuming in the West, and what I'm openly going to say is probably the case, until Vladimir Putin's military forces are able to remove the government of Ukraine and replace it with a more favorable Russian transplant and then negotiate with them. Now, that being said, Russian soldiers in this conflict seem to be losing their morale. In our last few episodes, we stated, is Russia losing the war? Now, the reality is Ukraine has presented a surprisingly effective resistance. Notably, their air defense system has failed to be shut down by Russia, which is crucial. When a larger great power invades a smaller nation, one of the most key factors of whether or not they're going to win this invasion is time. The invasion has to be quick and successive. If a greater power gets held up in a smaller nation, they're probably going to have to withdraw from the conflict, as it allows the local civilian population to organize for guerrilla warfare, which, as I've stated before, is not something that is winnable. The only way to win a guerrilla war as a large power against a third power or a smaller nation that is fighting for their independence or their freedom or resisting a larger nation is to ethnically cleanse all of those people, which I don't think even Russia or Russia under Vladimir Putin would go that far. Now, Ukraine's air defense system is still up. Ukraine's soldiers, its military, its paramilitary groups, and its militias have presented Russia with a massive resistance fight. In addition to this, normal civilians have joined this fight. People that are school teachers, people that are doctors, people that work in other fields that don't see combat are beginning to take up arms and fight the Russian invasion, using guerrilla tactics such as knocking down trees, creating barricades, leaving poison in grocery stores for Russian soldiers to drink, and attacking Russian convoys and units from behind. These hit-and-miss attacks have caused a lot of pain for the Russian soldiers, who, it must be noted that despite the stereotype, there is a stereotype of the Russian soldier or the Russian military being this very scary, very advanced, very elite military organization. When you think of a Russian soldier, you think of a Spetsnaz special operations soldier from the Soviet era that is ready to kill for motherland. But the reality is the vast majority of these soldiers in Ukraine, at least from what can be seen by those that have been captured, these are children. Not literally, they're not under the age of 18, but these are young kids between the ages of 18 and their early 20s. These people are confused and they've been misled by their government to fight in a conflict that they have no business fighting in. Now, in addition to this, while there are Russians who support the Federation's ambitions in Ukraine and probably are willing to fight for them, the vast majority of the soldiers, these young kids, are just there to receive a paycheck or an education or simply find a job in Russia's difficult economy. They have no emotional investment in being in Ukraine. When you compare that with the typical Ukrainian fighter who is defending their goddamn home, the willingness to fight, to shoot, to kill, to die is much higher on the Ukrainian side, making them much more effective soldiers. And this has led to massive disproportionate casualties on the Russian side. Now, official Russian figures, which were actually published yesterday for the first time in the conflict, state that 500 Russian soldiers have died and 1,600 have been wounded. They've stated that none have been captured. Now, the reality is that these numbers are probably significantly decreased in order for the Russian military to maintain the small amount of morale that it has left on the ground. The reality is independent estimates state that Russian casualties can be between anywhere from 3,500 deaths to 5,000 deaths and captures and wounded of Russian soldiers. That is a huge disparity. In addition to the massive death and suffering that has been inflicted upon the invading Russian forces, Food shortages have been a massive issue. Russian soldiers are relying on local grocery stores that they are raiding from taking over villages or parts of the road that their convoys or ground forces are moving on. They clearly do not have independently provided food from the Russian military, which this means these soldiers are demoralized. They are hungry. And because of an additional fuel shortage and the ability to logistically transport energy resources for tanks and armored convoys, they are stuck. Now, you may remember that 2 days ago, we reported on the massive Russian military convoy of tanks and other armored vehicles that was marching towards Ukraine. Now, this convoy is about 40 kilometers long, and it is only 16 miles outside of Kiev. And it really hasn't moved whatsoever because of a lack of food and because of local Ukrainians who have been standing with their own bodies in front of the convoy, placing trees in its way and other makeshift barricades. Now, these soldiers are lost, don't have food, and are goddamn cold. Keep in mind that a blizzard and a major snowstorm is moving through many parts of Ukraine, particularly Kiev. Not only are the soldiers cold, but the civilians are cold too, and this is raising the stakes of the war. Now, Russia has essentially moved away from its ground offensive, realizing that it's not as effective, and moved back towards its initial strategy of an air attack. Now, these aerial attacks are still being defended by Ukraine's Aerial Defense Service, which surprisingly is still up and has demonstrated massive effectiveness, being able to take out Russian fighter jets, Russian personnel carriers in the air, and other Russian aircraft, showing a major efficacy and helping Ukrainian cities hold out from this invasion. Now, not all of the news has been positive for Ukraine. Russia has also transitioned its strategy from not just a ground assault, but moving towards aerial assaults and amphibious assaults. Russian forces are not just focusing on the capital city of Kiev and Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, in the east. They're focusing on the south. And Russian soldiers have captured the city of Kherson, which is a major port city that is strategically and militarily important to the defense of Ukraine. Now, keep in mind that the southern cities of Ukraine are on the Black and Azov Sea. Sea access, maritime access during a war is incredibly crucial for both sides. Russia seems to be making a strategic importance of capturing these naval outlets and cutting off Ukraine from the sea. Now, not only does this cut off Ukraine from any form of naval resources that it has and from an outlet into open waters, this also creates a situation where if Russia is able to take key cities like Kherson, which it has already taken, Mariupol and Odessa in the south, Russia will have the ability to take the land that it has been holding since its occupation and annexation of Crimea in 2014 and create a military corridor extending from the eastern Crimea all the way throughout the south and the west to the borders of Romania, making a large staging area for Russian occupational forces to attack other cities in the north and east like Kharkiv and Kiev. Now, Kiev and Kharkiv are still holding out, but the reality is that this war is beginning to take a massive civilian toll. As I mentioned before, Russian military attacks are targeting residential areas. Many videos have been confirmed by independent news sources and by independent organizations on the ground that Russian missiles, bombardments, and different attacks have completely leveled certain residential areas, killing civilians in the process. Now, while many Ukrainians are disheartened and many are leaving their country, fleeing and seeking refuge, many others are fighting. And this is important. There is one thing that needs to be understood about this war when looking at the comparative military resources and the parity that exists between these two parties, Russia and Ukraine. Russia's military, even though it lacks the morale, is much larger, much more advanced, and fundamentally more experienced. Now, the reality is despite the fact that Russia is one of the world's great military superpowers, Ukraine has two major advantages. One, that it is fighting for its homeland. And two, its major civilian guerrilla resistance. Now, this guerrilla resistance, which is forming into a larger level every single day, is going to cause Russia major pains and make this conflict very difficult to fight. It should be noted that historically, Ukraine has a very proud history of fighting and holding out with guerrilla campaigns, notably during the Nazi occupation that occurred in Ukraine during World War II. Ukraine needs to seek into itself and take out this guerrilla spirit to hold out. The reality is they probably don't have to hold out that long. If you look at the sanctions and the ostracization that has happened to Russia on the international level, it is hurting. Russia has essentially been completely cut off from the world, excluding a few allies like Belarus, China, who is wavering on a daily basis of whether or not it actually supports Russia, and North Korea. It should be noted that North Korea is serving absolutely no benefit to Russia as an ally right now. Belarus is very, very minor, and it is just providing soldiers to fight in the conflict. And China itself is beginning to question its association with Russia. Russia is becoming more isolated. Its soldiers are growing more and more demoralized. While Putin keeps fighting for the demilitarization and fall of Ukraine, this is seeming less and less likely on a daily basis, despite some Russian advancements in the south of Ukraine. Now, how this conflict develops, we are going to only have to wait and see. Not only has this been one of the most important events in contemporary history, again, besides maybe 9/11 and maybe the coronavirus, this event is one of the most crucial, but also it is one of the most difficult to predict. Really, most people did not see Putin invading Ukraine. The only people that did were the United States government, and many people just thought, oh, well, they're trying to spread fear and make Russia the bad guy. It looks like they were right. Now, again, only time will tell. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let's have an open discussion about what's going on, and let's spread awareness about what's happening and how Ukrainians are fighting back for the independence of their country. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.